The 1980s didn't just give us neon colors and synth music. It gave us nightmares that stuck with us for life. These horror classics didn't just entertain us, they scarred us, thrilled us, and defined a generation's darkest fears. From shape-shifting monsters to cursed dolls, these films still haunt our memories. Let's relive the terror with unforgettable horror classics that haunted our childhood. The Shining, 1980. Before we even understood the layers of psychological torment or the metaphor of cabin fever, The Shining shattered our innocence. Stanley Kubrick didn't just make a haunted hotel movie, he turned a beautiful resort into a descent into madness. Jack Nicholson's portrayal of Jack Torrance was so intense, it made us question what might happen if our own dad stared too long at a typewriter. The twins in the hallway, the river of blood flowing from the elevator. Every shot was a mood, every whisper was a warning. The fact that it took place during a snowstorm. We didn't even feel safe during winter break after watching it. The kid who could shine, the isolation, the supernatural suspense, and that steady unraveling of sanity made it a slow-burning psychological horror that crept into our dreams. Whether it was the ghostly ballroom or the woman in room 237, The Shining wasn't a movie you just watched. It was one you experienced, and then spent the next 5 years trying to forget. Poltergeist, 1982. Poltergeist made us fear the very things that were supposed to comfort us. TVs, toys, and our own homes. It didn't take place in a gothic castle or haunted asylum. It happened in a middle-class suburban house, just like the one many of us lived in. That's what made it horrifying. The film combined childlike wonder with unimaginable terror. Carol Ann's famous line, "They're here," became the anthem of supernatural horror. That thing had no business being in a child's bedroom. Every kid who watched Poltergeist checked under their bed for weeks after. But there was also an eerie sense of real-life tragedy surrounding it. The film was followed by the unexpected deaths of several cast members. Whether or not you believed in curses, you couldn't shake the feeling that this movie opened a door to something dark and never closed it again. A Nightmare on Elm Street, 1984. What do you do when sleep becomes your enemy? A Nightmare on Elm Street made us terrified to close our eyes. Freddy Krueger wasn't just a slasher, he was a demon that lived in your dreams. With his burned face, bladed glove, and haunting lullabies, Freddy became an icon of horror and an eternal childhood fear. The concept was genius and deeply unsettling. If you die in your dream, you die in real life. Suddenly, sleepovers became group exercises in staying awake. Wes Craven created a villain that broke every rule. He was witty, sarcastic, and cruel. His power came not from strength, but from imagination. And to make it even more memorable, the film featured Johnny Depp's bloody debut, a bed that swallowed him whole. More than a movie, Elm Street was a cultural scare phenomenon. And once Freddy found his way into your dreams, he never left. Return of the Living Dead, 1985. It wasn't just the reanimated corpses, it was the screaming, fast-moving, brain-eating zombies that broke every rule we thought we knew. Return of the Living Dead threw out the slow, lumbering zombie model and gave us something far more terrifying. Zombies that ran, talked, and couldn't be killed by a simple headshot. Set in a warehouse in Sematary, the movie starts with a deadly gas leak that brings corpses back to life. Unlike other zombie films of the time, this one had a punk rock edge, loud and dripping with apocalyptic energy. The scariest part, the zombies in this movie were intelligent. They could plan, manipulate, and taunt. And let's not forget that infamous line, "Send more paramedics." Return of the Living Dead changed zombie horror forever, turning a gory nightmare into an adrenaline-fueled fever dream that stuck with us long after the credits rolled. Child's Play, 1988. If you grew up in the 80s, chances are you slept with your toys. Until Child's Play taught you that your favorite doll could be possessed by the soul of a serial killer. Chucky wasn't just creepy, he was downright sadistic. With his flaming red hair, overalls, and innocent smile, he turned the idea of childhood innocence into a weapon. A dying killer, transferring his soul into a good guy doll using voodoo magic. From there, Chucky begins a killing spree, all while trying to possess the body of young Andy. What made it worse was that no one believed the boy. The contrast between the toy's size and its brutal actions created a special kind of terror. After this movie, dolls weren't cute, they were potential murderers. Whether it was hiding under the bed or sitting on a shelf, Chucky made sure we never looked at toys the same way again. Pet Sematary, 1989. Some things are better left dead, and Pet Sematary made sure we remember that. Based on Stephen King's deeply unsettling novel, this film explored grief, denial, and the horrifying consequences of trying to undo death. It wasn't just a scary story, it was a devastating one. When the Creed family loses their son, Gage, they bury him in an ancient Native American burial ground with the hope of bringing him back. And Gage does come back, but not as the child they remembered. Watching a toddler commit acts of violence was deeply disturbing. But beyond the shock, the film haunted us with its emotional weight. What parent wouldn't do anything to bring their child back? Pet Sematary preyed on that very question. It told us that tampering with death was a line we should never cross, no matter how deep the pain. Pumpkinhead, 1988. In the quiet southern hills, vengeance has a name, and it's Pumpkinhead. This lesser-known gem introduced us to a creature born from grief, summoned through ancient magic, and bound to exact revenge. Directed by special effects legend Stan Winston, the film combined eerie folklore with haunting creature design. After his young son is tragically killed, a grieving father seeks out a reclusive witch to conjure the monstrous Pumpkinhead to take vengeance on those responsible. As the creature hunts its victims, the father begins to feel every kill, as if their pain is tied to his soul. What made Pumpkinhead terrifying wasn't just the creature's design, it was the theme of uncontrollable grief. The idea that we could unleash darkness in our sorrow hit deep. With misty woods, haunting cinematography, and a brutal moral lesson, Pumpkinhead felt like a living nightmare carved straight from childhood fears. The Howling, 1981. Before CGI, there were werewolves. Real, breathing, practical effect nightmares. When a news anchor survives a traumatic encounter with a serial killer, she's sent to a remote rehabilitation retreat, only to discover it's crawling with werewolves. The film's slow build, combined with eerie sounds and eerie settings, created an unbearable tension. But what made it unforgettable were the transformation scenes. Painful, detailed, and grotesquely mesmerizing. Unlike traditional werewolf tales, The Howling played with themes of trauma. It didn't just show monsters. It explored what it meant to become one. This was horror that howled through our screens and buried itself in our minds for decades. The Gate, 1987. Sometimes the most terrifying things come from our own backyard, literally. The Gate begins with two kids who accidentally unleash a horde of demons by playing a heavy metal record backward and digging up a hole in their backyard. That's the 80s for you, where rock music and ancient evil always seemed to go hand in hand. What made The Gate especially haunting was how it turned childhood curiosity into a nightmare. Glenn, played by a young Stephen Dorff, wasn't some rebellious teen. He was just a regular kid. That made it feel even closer to home. If he could open a gate to hell by accident, couldn't we? Then came the creatures. Stop-motion animation brought swarms of grotesque little demons to life, creating effects that were bizarre, unnatural, and deeply disturbing. And that infamous scene where a character pulls out a splinter, only to watch an eyeball grow in its place. The brilliance of The Gate was how it trapped us in a world where parents were absent, reality was crumbling, and the weight of saving the world fell on scared, confused kids. It reminded us that even the smallest crack could be a portal to something horrific, and you never really know what's buried beneath your backyard. Fright Night, 1985. You thought your neighbor was weird. Maybe he never came out in the daytime or had a suspicious number of guests at night. Fright Night took that suburban paranoia and twisted it into vampire terror. For teenager Charlie Brewster, discovering his next-door neighbor as a vampire wasn't just a horror fantasy. It was his terrifying reality. The genius of Fright Night lay in its setting. Ordinary suburbia. Vampires weren't lurking in castles anymore. They were right next door, wearing trench coats and charming the neighborhood. But it wasn't just the vampires that scared us. It was the idea that no adult would believe you. Charlie was left to fight a supernatural evil with only a washed-up horror movie host by his side. The transformation scenes, particularly the wolf and bat effects, were stunning for their time. They blended camp with genuine terror, and they lingered in your imagination. Fright Night reminded us that sometimes the monsters wear a human face, and they might be living right next door. Hellraiser, 1987. It was pure, relentless nightmare. From the moment we saw the puzzle box open and the chains shoot out, we knew this wasn't just another horror movie. This was something darker, more adult, more disturbing. At the heart of Hellraiser was the idea of forbidden desire. The puzzle box wasn't just a gateway to hell. It was a trap for those who sought pleasure beyond human limits. And what awaited them wasn't satisfaction. It was the Cenobites. They were explorers of sensation, beyond good and evil. With his eerie calm and iconic nails embedded in his skull, became the unforgettable face of the franchise. He didn't chase or scream. He offered choices, and somehow, that made him even scarier. The film's gritty visuals, grotesque body horror, and deeply psychological themes made it one of the most disturbing entries of the 80s. It wasn't about running from a killer. It was about confronting your own darkness. It made you question what kind of person would open the box in the first place. The Evil Dead, 1981. If ever a film proved that low budget doesn't mean low scare, it was The Evil Dead. Directed by a then-unknown Sam Raimi and starring Bruce Campbell, this cult classic took the idea of cabin in the woods and turned it into one of the most relentless assaults on the senses horror had ever seen. A group of friends stumble upon the Necronomicon, the Book of the Dead, while staying in an isolated cabin. Reading from it unleashes demonic forces that possess them one by one. The isolation, the madness, and the gore escalated at a pace so manic it felt like a fever dream. But what truly made The Evil Dead terrifying was its unpredictability. Characters weren't just killed. The demons taunted with sick glee, and no one was safe. Even today, The Evil Dead holds up as a masterclass in atmosphere and dread. It didn't need big names or massive budgets. Terror and a kind of evil that made the woods feel forever cursed. The Changeling, 1980. Before ghost stories became drenched in jump scares, there was The Changeling, a chilling atmospheric tale that haunted us with its quiet dread. George C. Scott plays a composer grieving the sudden loss of his wife and daughter. To escape the pain, he moves into an old mansion, but the house has a grief of its own. Unlike louder horror films of the decade, The Changeling relies on deep, emotional horror. A child's wheelchair moving on its own, a bouncing ball that returns after being thrown into a river. The film builds slowly, making every scare more impactful because it feels earned. You don't see blood or monsters, but what you feel is worse. You feel dread. Gremlins, 1984. It started with a gift, a fuzzy little creature named Gizmo. He was adorable, innocent, and gentle. Gremlins walked the line between comedy and horror. But for kids watching in the 80s, it was pure nightmare fuel. These weren't your typical monsters. They were gleefully destructive, and that's what made it worse. Their playfulness made their violence more shocking. One moment you're giggling, the next you're horrified. Whether it was the scene in the kitchen with knives and blenders or the eerie tale of a girl's father dying in a chimney dressed as Santa, Gremlins constantly shifted tone and kept you unbalanced. It wasn't just about creatures. It was about the fear that the things we love, the pets, the holiday gifts, could turn against us. And that lesson stayed with us long after the credits rolled.